I never thought I'd be the kind of man to sit here and question his marriage. Not after everything I promised, not after everything we had built. But the truth is, life has a way of wearing you down piece by piece, until one day you look around and realize you don't even recognize the life you're living anymore. 6 years ago, standing at the altar, I wasn't just saying words, I meant every single one of them. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. I believed in those vows. I still do. When I looked into her eyes, I saw my future. She wasn't just my wife, Tubish. She was a woman who had already fought through so many storms in her life. A woman raising kids on her own before me. A woman I swore I'd stand beside no matter what. She had 2 kids, already grown when I came into the picture. A lot of men might have kept them at arm's length, called them stepkids, and left it at that. Not me. From day one, I treated them as my own. They didn't always make it easy, but in time we became a family. And I thought that meant something unshakable. Our marriage wasn't flashy. We weren't posting perfect vacations on Instagram or buying brand new cars every other year. No, we lived a modest life. A little house, bills that always seemed to stretch a little too far, but enough love to make the small things feel big. Dinner at the kitchen table, laughing over stupid inside jokes. Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper, her curled up on the couch, me flipping channels until I found a football game. Road trips when we could afford the gas and a motel just us, the open road, and the kind of silence that only comes when you're truly comfortable with someone. That was our life, and I thought it would stay that way. But the thing about life is, you don't get a warning when the ground's about to give way. For us, it came in the form of COVID. Like everyone else, we thought we were being careful. We wore the masks, sanitized everything, stayed home more than we wanted to, and still, she got sick. At first, it looked like exhaustion. She was tired, achy, said she couldn't shake this heavy feeling in her chest. Then came the cough, the fever, the shortness of breath. I'll never forget that one night I sat at the edge of our bed listening to her struggle to breathe. Every wheeze cut into me like a blade. I remember staring at my phone, wondering if I should call an ambulance, terrified of what I might lose. She survived. She fought through it, and the doctors said we were lucky. And yeah, in one sense, we were. She was alive. But something else had changed. Something invisible. Something I couldn't fix with medicine or home remedies. It's hard to explain if you haven't lived it. She came out of that illness, physically weaker, sure, but mentally. It was like the light in her eyes had gone out. The woman I married, the one who teased me when I burned dinner, who laughed at my terrible jokes, who loved to plan little weekend trips, that woman was gone. At first, I told myself it was just temporary. She'd been through a trauma, and healing takes time. I was patient. I cooked. I cleaned. I made sure she had what she needed. I reassured myself, this is just a phase. She bounced back, but the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. And she didn't bounce back. She stayed in bed, the curtains drawn tight, the room heavy and dark. She didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to go out to dinner, didn't want to see friends. I'd come home from work to find her still under the covers, barely lifting her head. Let's get some fresh air, I'd say, forcing a smile. I can't, she'd whisper, shaking her head. Maybe we can see a counselor, just talk it out. No, you don't understand. Sometimes she snapped, her frustration spilling over like boiling water. Other times she cried, apologizing, saying she didn't know what was wrong with her. But either way, nothing ever changed. So I kept stepping up. I paid the bills, handled the groceries, cooked the meals, did the laundry, mowed the lawn. I carried all of it because I thought that's what a good husband does. And honestly, for a while, I didn't mind. That's what for better or worse means. But here's what people don't talk about. It wasn't the chores that broke me. I could have done dishes every night for the rest of my life. It was the silence, the lack of appreciation, the way no matter what I did, it was never enough. If I came home after a hard day and said, "Man, today was rough at work," she'd snap back, "Rough? Try living in this body. Try feeling like this every day." And I'd stand there, guilty, because she wasn't wrong. She was in pain. She was struggling. But what about me? When did my struggles stop mattering? When did my exhaustion, my fear, my loneliness become invisible? That's when the guilt started to eat at me. I told myself I had no right to complain. She was the sick one. She was the one trapped in her own body. Who was I to ask for sympathy? But guilt doesn't erase hurt. It just pushes it down, buries it, until one day it starts rotting inside of you. One night, I came home late. I'd stayed at the office, trying to pick up some overtime. When I walked in, the house was a mess, dishes piled high, laundry untouched, the trash overflowing. She was still in bed. I walked in, set my briefcase down, and asked softly, "How are you feeling?" She didn't even look at me, just sighed, rolled over, and said, "Why do you even ask? Nothing ever changes." I froze. Tie in one hand, briefcase in the other. I just stood there, staring at the wall, feeling something inside me crack. I wanted to yell, to cry, to shake her and say, "Fight. Please, fight for us." But instead, I just walked into the kitchen. I set down my tie, rolled up my sleeves, and started cleaning. And as I stood there scrubbing pots, my hands raw from the hot water, a thought crept in that I never wanted to admit to myself. How much longer can I live like this? The thought terrified me. I hated myself for even thinking it. I told myself I was tired, that it was just a bad day. But deep down, I knew the truth. The foundation of our marriage, the thing we had built brick by brick, was starting to crack. And once cracks appear, they don't just fix themselves, they spread. Quietly, slowly, until one day, the whole structure is at risk of collapse. Looking back now, I think that was the moment the story really began. Not the day we said our vows, not the day COVID entered our home. No, the real beginning was that night, in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes, when I realized hope was slipping away. And once hope is gone, there's no easy way back. People always say betrayal feels like a knife in the back. But the truth, it feels more like the ground disappearing under your feet. One moment you're standing on solid earth, and the next you're falling grasping for anything to hold on to. But there's nothing there. Just air, just emptiness. For me, that fall began on a grey, rainy afternoon. The kind where the sky hangs low and the house feels too quiet. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't suspicious. Her phone was sitting on the coffee table. Mine was charging in the bedroom, and I just wanted to check the time. That was it. Just a simple, thoughtless action. But then the screen lit up. A message from a name I didn't recognize, and 3 words, 3 simple, ordinary words that gutted me. "I miss you. It's amazing how fast your body reacts before your brain even catches up. My hands went cold. My stomach twisted like I'd been punched. I told myself I'd misread it, that maybe it was a mistake, maybe a scam, maybe not anything but what it looked like. But I knew. Deep down, I already knew. My thumb hovered, trembling, before I slid the screen open. And there it was. A thread of messages, stretching back days, maybe weeks. Not just a single slip-up, not some harmless joke. No, these were conversations. Familiar, intimate conversations. Promises, confessions, flirtations. Things that weren't meant for me. I sank onto the sofa, staring at the words, the rain hammering against the window in rhythm with my heartbeat. My ears rang. My chest felt tight, like something inside me was collapsing in on itself. What cut the deepest wasn't just what she wrote, it was how she wrote it. The little quirks in her typing, the way she used certain words, the pet names. The same style, the same tone she once used with me. Except this time, they weren't mine. That familiarity was the knife. That was what made me bleed. I sat there, whispering one question under my breath, over and over. Why? We had been through hell together. Her sickness, the financial strain, the endless responsibilities that fell on my shoulders. I stayed. I carried it. I didn't walk away when things got ugly. And yet, in the middle of all of that, when I thought my loyalty meant something, she turned somewhere else. That night, I didn't confront her. I put her phone back exactly where it had been. I walked outside, sat on the porch, and let the rain soak through my shirt until I was shivering. I thought I'd explode. Thought I'd storm inside, throw the phone on the bed, scream, demand answers. But I didn't. The pain was too heavy, too raw, too massive to fit into words. So I said nothing. The next few days were like living in a dream I couldn't wake from. I watched her, closer than before. The calls she silenced when I walked into the room. The way she angled the phone away from me, like she was shielding it. The glow of the screen late at night when she thought I was asleep. And with every little thing, the crack inside me grew wider. You know that feeling when you're driving and you hit a pothole too hard? You hear the suspension creak, the frame shudder. The car still moves, but you know something's been damaged. That was me. On the surface, I kept going. I still woke up early, went to work, paid the bills, cooked, cleaned. To anyone else, we looked like a married couple trudging through hard times. But underneath, something had snapped. One evening, I finally tried. I gave her an opening. We were sitting in the living room, the TV flickering in the background, and I turned to her. Is there something you want to tell me? Her eyes flickered just for a second. Panic. Then she looked away and shook her head. No, there's nothing. I studied her face. The way she avoided mine, the tension in her shoulders. I was searching for honesty, for a sliver of the woman I married. But all I saw was a wall, brick and unyielding. I didn't push. I just nodded, pretending to accept it. But inside, I knew. The truth didn't need her. Confession, I'd already read it. Already felt it. That night, lying in bed beside her, the silence was deafening. She was inches away, but she might as well have been on another planet. I listened to her steady breathing and thought about the words she'd written to someone else. Words I would never hear again, and in that moment, I understood something. Betrayal doesn't just break trust. It rewrites the story of your life. Every memory suddenly looks different. The laughs, the hugs, the whispered goodnights, all of it starts to feel tainted. Like you can't tell what was real and what was a lie. They say time heals everything, but they don't tell you about the scars, about the way betrayal etches itself into your bones. A reminder you carry long after the wound closes. From that day on, I knew our marriage had a crack. Not a surface scratch. Not something a little glue could fix. No, this was the kind of crack that runs deep, that spreads with every step. Until one day the whole structure collapses, and no matter how much I wanted to deny it, no matter how hard I tried to keep us standing, I knew one truth I couldn't escape. Our marriage would never be whole again. I can still remember, as if it were yesterday, the early days of our marriage. 6 years ago, this house was filled with warmth. Dinner was always a small celebration, even if it was just takeout or a simple meal I threw together after work. We would sit at the table together, talk about our days, laugh about the smallest things. She would tell me stories about her children, about the struggles she had endured before I came into her life, and I would share my worries from work or the silly things that happened in the office. Back then, even our arguments were different. A disagreement might spark over bills, over chores, over something trivial, but they never lasted long. By the end of the night, one of us would reach out, break the silence, and the fight would dissolve into laughter or into the comfort of a hug. The house always felt alive. It felt like home. Now, when I sit at the same table, the silence is deafening. I eat alone, the clink of my fork against the plate echoing in a kitchen that feels colder than it should. Food grows cold before anyone touches it, because more often than not, she doesn't come out of the bedroom. The chair across from me is empty, and sometimes I stare at it too long, as if by willpower alone I could make her sit there again, smiling like she used to. I told myself, at first, that this was temporary, that it was just the illness, the trauma from COVID, the fatigue. I thought, be patient, she needs you now more than ever. And I tried. God knows I tried. I picked up the chores she no longer had the energy for. Laundry, dishes, bills, cooking, I did it all. At first, it even gave me a strange sense of pride. I told myself, this is what marriage means. This is what loyalty is. You step up when your partner can't. But slowly, the pride faded, replaced by exhaustion. The problem wasn't the work itself. The problem was the silence. Day after day, I'd leave the office drained. And instead of coming home to a place of comfort, I came home to heaviness. Sometimes I'd hear the low hum of the TV from the bedroom, but no conversation followed. I'd knock on the door, ask how she was feeling, and get a shrug or a muttered complaint. If I suggested we go for a walk, meet a friend, sit outside for some fresh air, she would snap at me. She accused me of pushing her, of not understanding what she was going through. It got to the point where I felt invisible in my own house. I loved her, I pitied her, I was angry at her, and I hated myself for feeling that anger. The conflict inside me was relentless. Part of me wanted to hold her until she found her strength again, and another part of me wanted to shake her, to scream, "Don't you see I'm drowning too?" And yet, every time I opened my mouth, the words that came out were softer than the storm inside. I swallowed my frustration because I didn't want to add to her pain. But in doing that, I was quietly bleeding out. Work became my escape. It was the one place where I felt like me again. At the office, I wasn't the husband walking on eggshells. I wasn't the caretaker. I wasn't the man failing to fix his marriage. I was just a co-worker, a friend, someone people could rely on. And it was there, in that fragile space, that something dangerous began to grow. There's this woman I've worked with for years. She's not new in my life, not a stranger who suddenly appeared to tempt me. She's been there all along. But recently, I found myself noticing her more. It wasn't physical, not at first. It was her laugh. It was the way she asked me, one late afternoon, "Are you okay? You look tired." That was it. A simple, ordinary question. But it hit me harder than I expected, because it had been months, maybe more than a year since anyone had looked at me and asked if I was okay. With my wife, every conversation turned into a competition of suffering. If I had a bad day, hers was worse. If I was tired, she was exhausted. If I was stressed about money, she reminded me I wasn't working enough. There was no space left for my feelings. So when this co-worker showed me a shred of care, my heart latched onto it like a starving man reaching for bread. I started looking forward to her smile. I found reasons to pass her desk. I offered her coffee when she didn't ask. And late at night, in the silence of my house, I caught myself thinking about her laughter more than my wife's voice. That realization terrified me. I asked myself, have I already crossed a line? Even if nothing physical has happened, hasn't my heart already betrayed my marriage? I tried to fight it. I tried to focus on my wife, to remind myself of the vows I made. But the truth was, every attempt at connection with her ended in disappointment. I'd tell her about a stressful day, and she'd dismiss it with, "You think you're tired. You don't know tired." I'd bring up finances, and she'd accuse me of not doing enough. Every time I reached for her, I came back with empty hands and a heavier heart. One night, sitting alone in the living room, the lamp casting a dull glow across the floor, I felt like I was living two lives. In one life, I was the devoted husband, pushing through, trying to keep the roof from caving in. In the other, I was a man aching for warmth, for a kind word, for something that reminded me I was still alive, and I didn't know which version of me was winning. All I knew was that the flame of our marriage, the fire that once made this house a home, was fading, flicker by flicker, and I didn't know how to stop it. There are days when I convince myself I can still save this marriage, that what we're going through is only temporary, that if I just hold on a little longer, carry a little more weight, and keep showing up, eventually she'll see it, eventually she'll come back to me. But then, it only takes one cold stare, one short exchange, one slammed door, and that fragile hope comes crashing down like a house of cards. One evening, after a long day at work, I stopped by the grocery store. I had this idea in my head, maybe if I made dinner special, it would break through the wall that had grown between us. I picked up a bottle of wine, 2 steaks, some fresh vegetables. I even grabbed a small bouquet of flowers, though I knew there was a good chance she wouldn't care. When I got home, I set the table, seasoned the steaks, and let the scent of butter and garlic fill the kitchen. I poured the wine, lit a candle, and stood back for a moment, picturing how it used to be. In my mind, I could almost hear her laugh, see her smile, feel her hand reaching for mine across the table. I knocked on the bedroom door and said softly, "Dinner's ready. Come, eat with me." There was a pause. Then her voice came through the door, flat and tired. "I'm not hungry." "You go ahead." I tried again. "I cooked your favorite. Just sit with me, even if you don't eat much." Nothing. The TV hummed in the background, and I stood there like a fool, waiting for a moment that never came. So I ate alone. The steak cooled on the plate, the wine lost its flavor, and the flowers sat in the middle of the table like some cruel reminder of the love that used to live here. By the time I washed the dishes, I felt like I had hammered another nail into the coffin of a marriage. I no longer recognized. That kind of night didn't just hurt once it echoed. It replayed itself in my head every time I walked through the door, every time I heard the same silence filling the house. Soon, I found myself dragging my feet when the workday ended. I used to rush home, eager to see her. Now I stayed late at the office, organizing files I didn't need to, cleaning up my desk, finding excuses to avoid the emptiness waiting for me. And that's when the line between duty and desire started to blur. My coworker, the one I had known for years, became the person I lingered around. We stayed late on a few projects together, and there was one night we both left the office long after the city lights had come on. We walked to the parking lot, the street lamps casting long shadows, and the air was cool with the smell of rain. She told me about her childhood, her family, her own worries. I listened, and then, for the first time in months, I found myself opening up in return. I didn't tell her everything, not the whole mess of my marriage, but enough. Enough that she knew I was carrying something heavy. That night, I offered her a ride home. When we pulled up to her place, neither of us got out right away. We just sat there in the car, the silence thick with everything unspoken. We didn't touch. We didn't cross any physical line. But when I looked at her and she looked back, we both knew there was a current running between us, pulling us closer. I turned away first, forcing myself to break the moment. She said goodnight, and I drove off, my heart pounding like I had done something terrible, though technically I hadn't, not yet. When I got home, the house was dark. She was still in bed, the room dim except for the flicker of the television. I stood at the doorway and asked quietly, "Do you need anything?" She didn't even glance at me. Close the door, and I did. I closed the door, and in that click of the latch, I felt the weight of guilt pressing down on me, mixing with anger and despair. Was I a husband protecting his marriage, or was I just a man clinging to the ruins of something already gone? That question haunted me. I knew I was standing on the edge, one step closer to my coworker, one more moment like that in the car, and I'd be somewhere I couldn't come back from. And the terrifying part was, I wasn't sure I even wanted to come back. A few nights later, I tried to break through with my wife. I sat on the edge of the bed and told her straight, "We need help. You need help. Therapy, counseling, something. I can't carry this alone anymore. If we don't do something, I don't know where this marriage is going." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the wall. Then tears welled in her eyes, and she whispered, "Do you think I want to be like this? Do you think I don't hate it too? But I can't change. I don't have the strength." I wanted to hold her. God, I wanted to believe her tears were the beginning of something new. But my arms froze midair, because deep down I knew that crying wasn't the same as trying. That night, I realized I had stopped hoping. I still cooked. I still cleaned. I still asked if she needed anything. But inside, I was already retreating. I had started living half a life in that house, dutiful, mechanical, while the other half of me craved something I could only find outside. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't about betrayal in the way people usually define it. It was about wanting to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel alive. My marriage felt like a candle burning down to nothing. The flame flickered, weak and desperate, barely holding on, and me. I was standing too close to a different kind of fire. There's something strange about boundaries. We like to believe we'll recognize the moment we cross one, that there will be a flashing red light, a siren in the distance, some clear warning that says, this is too far. But real life isn't like that. Crossing the line doesn't usually come with alarms. It begins quietly, almost innocently. A good morning text, a funny story shared between meetings, a photo of the sky outside her office window, followed by a picture of my cluttered desk in return. A laugh in the break room that lingered just a little too long. And before I knew it, I was standing on ground I swore I'd never walk. At first it felt harmless, just a co-workers talking. But the truth is, I started looking forward to her messages more than anything else in my day. My phone would buzz, and suddenly the grayness around me would lighten. She sent me snapshots of her life, her morning coffee, a new book she was reading, a sunset she caught on her way home. I responded with pictures of my own takeout lunches, the neighbor's cat sitting on my porch, the quiet view of my office parking lot at dusk. It was ordinary, yet in that ordinariness, I found a lifeline. One evening, after we stayed late finishing a project, she asked softly, "Want to grab something to eat? I'm starving, and there's not much open at this hour." We ended up at a diner that stayed open all night. The air smelled of coffee and fried food, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. We ordered burgers, fries, and 2 sodas. Sitting across from each other in the dim glow of yellow lights, we didn't talk about heavy things. Instead, we shared stories of college days, our favorite movies, silly memories of childhood. For 2 hours, I felt like I wasn't carrying the crushing weight of my marriage, my home, my responsibilities. For 2 hours, I felt light. When I drove her home, we sat in the car a little longer than we should have. The silence between us was thick with something unspoken. All it would have taken was one touch, one lean across the console, and everything would change. But I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to look straight ahead. She let out a soft sigh, gave me a half smile, and said, almost like she could see straight through me, "You're a good man. But you're hurting." That broke something in me. Not because it was false, but because it was painfully true. I was hurting. I was exhausted, empty, running on fumes. And here was someone who saw it, who named it. When at home, I felt invisible. I went back to the house I shared with my wife. She was in the living room, slouched on the couch, the glow of the TV washing her face in cold, artificial light. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd just had one of the easiest, warmest dinners in months, that I laughed like I hadn't in years, that I felt alive again. But I knew how she'd respond. With silence, with dismissal, with words that cut, even when she didn't mean them to. So I said nothing. I passed by her like a ghost in my own home, climbed the stairs, and lay awake in the dark, replaying the sound of another woman's laughter in my head. The days blurred together. Outwardly, I played my role as husband. I cooked, paid the bills, asked her how she was doing. But inside, my heart had shifted. I waited for my phone to buzz at lunchtime. I stayed later at the office just to share a few extra minutes with her. I found myself smiling again, and the cruel truth was this. My wife hadn't been the reason behind that smile in a very long time. The line I swore I'd never cross had already faded. Every day I lingered in that grey space, telling myself I was still in control. That, as long as nothing physical happened, I wasn't betraying her. But deep down, I knew better. One night, after yet another argument at home, though argument might be too generous a word, it was more like a cold war of sighs, silences, and clipped phrases like, "Do whatever you want, or I don't care anymore." I walked out. I grabbed my keys, drove aimlessly, letting the empty roads and the hum of the radio drown out my thoughts. I didn't want to go home, and yet I couldn't just drive forever. Before I realized it, my car rolled to a stop in front of her apartment. I sat there for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding. I told myself to turn around, to go home, to not make a mistake I could never take back. But another voice in my head whispered louder, "You're already gone. Your marriage already ended in all the ways that mattered. You're just waiting for your body to catch up to your heart." I don't remember the exact moment I knocked, only that when the door opened, warm light spilled out, and she looked at me with a mix of surprise and something else understanding. "You don't have to explain," she whispered. "I know," and in that moment, the boundary vanished. I wish I could say I felt only guilt, or only relief, but the truth was messier. I felt both. Relief, because for the first time in so long, I wasn't numb. I felt warmth, connection, life, and guilt, because I knew I had just betrayed not only my wife, but the man I thought I was. When I finally left her place that night, I sat in my car staring at my hands. These hands had crossed a line I once believed was unshakable. In the rearview mirror, I barely recognized my self-tired eyes, hollow cheeks, but with the faintest glimmer of light I hadn't seen in years. I had stepped into a new chapter, and the terrifying part was, I had no idea if I was strong. I still remember the exact evening when I realized I was standing at a crossroads. It wasn't dramatic, like something out of a movie. No shouting, no slammed doors, no ultimatums. Just me, sitting in my car in the driveway, the engine still running, staring at the dim light glowing from our bedroom window. I should have gone inside. I should have opened the door, asked my wife how her day was, maybe tried to bring her a little comfort. But instead, I just sat there, frozen, my hands on the steering wheel, my chest tight with the weight of a truth I didn't want to admit. My heart wasn't in it anymore. When we first got married, I promised myself I'd never be the guy who gave up, especially not on someone who was sick, someone who had already been beaten down by life. But the problem wasn't only her illness anymore. It was the silence between us, the coldness that had crept in and made our home feel less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Inside, she was waiting, though not really for me. She was waiting for comfort, for answers, for strength that I had run out of. And I knew the second I walked through that door, I would once again have to set aside my own exhaustion and become the caretaker, the provider, the one who held it all together. And I wasn't sure I could anymore. That night, I drove round the block instead of going in. Just once. Just a few minutes of borrowed freedom, windows down, the cool night air filling my lungs. And I thought about her, my co-worker, not in a lustful way, but in a way that made me ache. Her laughter, the way she actually looked me in the eye when I talked, like she saw me, not just the role I played. With her, I felt human again. With my wife, I felt like a ghost, and yet I hated myself for it, because this wasn't who I was supposed to be. My parents had raised me on values of loyalty, honor, commitment. I was the man who prided himself on being dependable, the one who didn't flinch when things got hard. But here I was, secretly longing for a life outside the one I had built, fantasizing about someone else while my wife struggled to even get out of bed. The guilt was like a stone in my gut, but guilt alone wasn't enough to make me stay, at least not in the way a husband should stay. Over the next few weeks, I really tried to bridge the gap with my wife. I suggested little things. Maybe we could go for a short walk in the park. Maybe watch a movie together in the living room instead of in bed. Sometimes she said yes, but her yes was hollow. Her body was there, but her spirit wasn't. Other times she shut me down with a look that said, "Why are you even asking? Don't you know I can't?" And with each rejection, each sigh, each cold silence, a little more of me slipped away. I didn't cheat. I didn't cross that physical line. But emotionally, I had already stepped out of my marriage, and I think deep down she knew it too. That's why she clung so tightly when she found out about the attraction between me and my coworker. It wasn't just jealousy, it was desperation. A fear of losing me completely. But what she didn't realize was that I was already gone in ways I couldn't explain. Gone in the way I dreaded coming home. Gone in the way I dreamed of escape. Gone in the way. I caught myself smiling more in a 10-minute conversation at work than I had in months at home. That was the crossroad. Do I keep trying to resurrect a marriage that felt more like duty than love? Or do I admit the painful truth that I was already halfway out the door? And the hardest part wasn't even choosing between her and someone else. It was choosing between who I wanted to be, the loyal husband, the man who never quit, and who I actually was in that moment, a man who was exhausted, lonely, and desperately craving a life where love didn't feel like a burden. That night, as I finally turned off the car and walked into the house, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stand in this in-between space forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to choose. There's one night I'll never forget. Not because of any explosive argument, not because of anything dramatic. No, it was the quiet that made it unforgettable. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room, casting a dull yellow glow across the furniture. I sat alone on the couch, my elbows on my knees, my hands clutching my head. Down the hall, my wife lay in the bedroom, turned away from the door, her body curled under the blanket like a fortress I could no longer enter. The silence was suffocating, so thick I could hear the tick of the wall clock, every second dragging, every tick a reminder of how far we'd drifted. I used to believe love could conquer anything, that if I gave enough, if I tried hard enough, if I sacrificed enough, I could pull her out of the darkness. That one day she'd smile again, step outside with me, maybe walk hand in hand down a sunlit street like we used to. But that belief, it was crumbling, piece by piece. She was still trapped not just by illness, but by her own refusal to open the door to life again. I tried everything, knocking softly on her bedroom door, pulling back the curtains to let in light, turning on her favorite songs. But what I got in return was always the same: a shake of the head, a heavy sigh, or those tired eyes that seemed to say, "You don't understand. You can't understand." And maybe she was right. Maybe I couldn't. I couldn't fully understand her pain, the way her body betrayed her, or the scars of her past that chained her down. But I did understand something else all too well. The feeling of slowly disappearing inside my own marriage. There were nights when I'd finish a long shift at work, and my co-workers would invite me to grab a beer, to laugh, to relax, to feel like a regular guy again. But I always turned them down, telling myself I needed to get home to her. Yet when I walked into our silent house, when I set my keys down on the counter, there was no warm smile waiting for me. No, how was your day? No connection, just duty, just obligation, and in those empty spaces, that's where she slipped in. My co-worker, the woman whose laugh I found myself waiting for, whose conversations reminded me that I was more than a caretaker, more than a tired husband. With her, I felt seen. With her, I felt alive. I hated myself for it. I knew I was dancing on the edge of a fire I had no right to touch. But when my wife discovered what was happening, that there was a pull between me and someone else, I didn't deny it. I couldn't, she cried, her eyes swollen and red, her voice trembling as she asked me, "Are you really going to leave me? Are you going to walk away when I'm at my weakest?" Her words cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard. Because she wasn't wrong. To even consider leaving her now, after everything, would make me exactly the kind of man I swore I'd never become. That night, for the first time in months, we sat across from each other. No phones, no TV humming in the background, no distractions. Just two people separated by a gulf of silence. She stared at me, her face streaked with tears, and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you still love me?" I froze. The truth clawed at my chest, and I knew my answer could change everything. Finally, I whispered, I don't know anymore. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't anger. It was the raw, painful truth. Because love, once so strong, had been buried under months of exhaustion, rejection, and loneliness. It wasn't gone completely, but it was no longer enough to carry us forward. She sobbed openly, her shoulders shaking, and I just sat there, still as stone, my heart heavy but oddly relieved. For the first time in so long, I wasn't hiding. For the first time, I'd spoken a truth I could no longer keep inside. That night, I didn't reach for her. I didn't pretend things were fine. She turned away from me in bed, her back rigid, her breathing uneven with quiet sobs. And I lay on my side, eyes wide open until morning, staring at the ceiling and imagining two paths before me. One path, stay. Keep carrying the weight. Keep sacrificing. Keep living in a house where love had become a memory instead of a reality. The other path, leave. Accept the shame, the guilt, the label of the man who abandoned his sick wife. Own the fact that I would be called selfish, heartless, weak. But at least be honest. At least give myself a chance to breathe, to live, to love without resentment. For the first time, I leaned, if only slightly, toward the second path. And that terrified me more than anything, because it meant the man I thought I was, the man I swore I'd always be, was slipping away. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the cracks of the blinds, pale and tired, just like the atmosphere hanging inside the house. I woke up first. For a long while, I just lay there on my back, staring at the ceiling. Beside me, my wife was turned away, her body stiff, her breathing uneven, like she wasn't really asleep, only pretending to rest so she wouldn't have to face me. I got out of bed quietly and walked into the kitchen. The kettle whistled, steam curling upward in thin threads. I poured myself a cup of coffee and set it down on the table. A few minutes later, she walked in. Her hair was tangled, her eyes swollen from crying, yet her face was so cold it made her look like a stranger. We sat at the same table, just a few feet apart, but it felt like there were miles whole countenance between us. Not a word was spoken. The only sounds were the spoon scraping against porcelain and the dry, mechanical tick of the wall clock. Once, I used to think silence meant peace. But this silence was different. It was the sound of two people who had nothing left to fight for, nothing left to fix. A silence that comes when a marriage is worn down to its bones. Later, I grabbed my keys and drove to work. The morning traffic swirled around me, honking horns, flashing lights, commuters rushing down sidewalks. Yet everything looked blurred, like I was watching life happen through fogged glass. The world kept moving, but I felt stuck in place. When I parked and walked into the office, I heard a voice, soft, almost hesitant. "Hey, are you okay?" It was her. The co-worker. Just a simple question, nothing more. But it stopped me in my tracks. Do you know how long it had been since anyone had asked me that? Since anyone had looked at me and actually wanted to hear the truth? I forced a smile, gave the automatic response. "Yeah, I'm fine." But we both knew it was a lie. That question echoed in my head all day. Numbers on spreadsheets blurred into nonsense. Emails piled up unanswered. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, but all I could think about was that moment, her eyes, her concern, the way she noticed me. And when I compared that small moment of warmth to the cold silence waiting for me at home, I felt something shift inside me. I used to believe responsibility and patience could save anything, that if you just held on long enough, if you did the right things, paid the bills, cleaned the house, stayed faithful, the marriage would survive. But I was beginning to understand. Love doesn't survive on duty alone. It needs reciprocity. It needs tenderness. It needs warmth. And none of that lived in our house anymore. That evening, when I came home, the kitchen was dark. No smell of dinner. No background noise from the TV. The whole house was heavy with quiet. I found her in the living room, sitting straight-backed on the couch, hands clenched tight in her lap. Her eyes were locked on me cold, but brimming with unshed tears. "Sit down," she said. I obeyed, my chest pounding. She took a breath, then spoke slowly, each word hitting the air like a stone. "If you want to leave, then leave. But don't stay here halfway. I can't take this anymore." The room froze. My throat tightened. I wanted to protest, to tell her, "No, you're wrong. I'll try harder. I'll stay." But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come, because deep down I knew she was right. I wasn't really there anymore. Not fully. From that night forward, we lived like two people waiting for a final verdict. I went through the motions: work, groceries, bills, cooking. She withdrew into herself, spending more time in the bedroom than anywhere else. Sometimes, through the door, I heard her crying, muffled sobs she tried to hide. I would stand outside, my hand hovering over the doorknob, wanting to go in, to hold her, to say something. But fear kept me frozen. Not fear of her tears, fear of what I'd see reflected back in her eyes. A man already gone. On some nights, I sat out on the porch with a beer in hand, staring at the rain-slick streets glowing under the streetlights. I asked myself over and over, if I left, would it be freedom for both of us? Or would I become the wound she could never forgive, the scar she would carry for life? And what about me? Could I live with myself if I broke her heart this way? Memories haunted me. Our wedding day, the white dress, her radiant smile, The way her hand trembled in mine as we promised forever in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow. I had believed those vows with my whole soul, and now I was standing on the edge of breaking every one of them. Sometimes I watched her as she lay turned away in bed, her shoulders small, her body curled in on itself. She looked fragile, almost childlike in her grief. I wanted to reach out, to touch her, but something inside me stopped me every time. The distance between us wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, emotional, unbridgeable. And in those long hours of darkness, I realized something. Love doesn't always die with betrayal. It doesn't always die with illness or tragedy. Sometimes, love dies in silence. It dies in the slow erosion of days when two people stop trying, when the spark is gone, when the fight to stay connected slips away unnoticed. What was left between us wasn't love anymore. It was just two wounded souls circling each other, each one too tired and too hurt to find the way back. And that was the fracture, the one that could never heal. I never imagined I'd find myself sitting in a therapist's office, staring at a box of tissues placed carefully between two chairs, wondering if the word marriage still had any meaning left for us. The room smelled faintly of lavender, and there was a soft hum of white noise coming from a machine tucked away in the corner, designed to keep our conversations private. I remember thinking how ironic that was, how we needed a machine to cover up words we could barely say to each other. My wife sat across from me, her shoulders slumped, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. The therapist asked us to talk about why we were there. My wife started first. Her voice was shaky at first, but then gained strength. She said she wanted to fight for our marriage, that she knew she had pulled away, that her illness and depression had swallowed her whole, and she was sorry for how much weight I had been carrying. She said she was scared of being alone, scared of being abandoned, and I sat there, nodding, listening, but inside, my chest felt hollow. It was as if she was talking about saving something I had already buried months ago. I wanted to reach for her, to say, "I'm still here, I'll try," but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, all I could think about was how long it had been since I felt like her partner. How long it had been since I felt seen. Week after week, we came back to that office. We repeated the same patterns, her confessing fears, me confessing exhaustion, the therapist suggesting new ways to communicate. Try to express gratitude, she told my wife once. Even just a small acknowledgement of what he does every day. And for a week or two, my wife tried. She would thank me for cooking dinner, or for folding the laundry, but it felt rehearsed, mechanical, as if she were checking off boxes instead of truly feeling it. And I hated myself for noticing that, for wanting more than she could give. At night, when I lay in bed beside her, the silence stretched like a canyon between us. I remembered the nights early in our marriage, when we would talk for hours in the dark about our dreams, our kids, the places we wanted to see together. Back then, even the quiet felt full. Now, it felt suffocating. I would stare at the ceiling, listening to her breathing, wondering if maybe I was the one who had changed. Maybe I had grown impatient, selfish, unable to withstand the storms of marriage like I thought I could. One evening, after another counseling session that ended in frustration, I sat alone in the living room with a pen and paper. I hadn't handwritten anything in years, but typing on a screen felt too distant. I wanted to feel the ink bleed into the page, to see the scratches and mistakes, the rawness of it all. I decided to write a letter, Not to her, not even to the therapist, but to myself. I wrote about the early days, the way I had felt when we first fell in love. How she used to smile at me like I was the only person in the world. How I promised myself that I would never be like those men who gave up when things got hard. I wrote about the years of holding her through pain, of cooking dinners when she was too tired to get out of bed, of handling bills and house repairs and late nights at work. I wrote about the loneliness that had slowly crept in, the way her eyes had stopped meeting mine, the way my jokes no longer made her laugh. I wrote about my coworker, not her name, not the details, just the way her presence reminded me of the man I used to be, alive, light-hearted, hopeful. And then I wrote about the guilt, the crushing, suffocating guilt of wanting more, of feeling like a coward for even considering walking away from a woman who had been broken by life in ways she never asked for, of being the man who leaves his sick wife, the man I swore I would never become. When I finished, the pages were messy with ink and smudges where I had pressed too hard or dragged my hand across wet lines. I folded them carefully, placed them in a box where I kept other mementos of my life, and promised myself that no matter what happened, I would not forget these words. Because they weren't just confessions. They were reminders of who I was, who I had been, and who I might become. In the weeks that followed, I carried that letter in my mind like a secret anchor. Therapy continued, but something in me had shifted. I realized that freedom, the idea of walking away, of starting over, wasn't about emptiness. It wasn't about leaving behind a broken home just to find a lighter one. It was about giving myself permission to feel alive again, to stop living like a shadow of myself. The truth was, I had already left in pieces. Emotionally, mentally, I had been gone for months. What remained was the shell of a husband going through the motions, trying to honor vows that had long since lost their meaning in practice, even if they still held weight on paper. And admitting that to myself was both terrifying and liberating. One night, as I sat with my wife in the quiet, she reached for my hand. Her grip was weak, tentative. She asked if I thought we were going to make it. For the first time, I didn't say yes. I didn't offer false hope or platitudes. I just sat there, silent, letting the weight of honesty hang between us. And in that silence, I think we both understood. Sometimes love doesn't end with a dramatic explosion. Sometimes it withers quietly, like a candle left unattended until it burns itself out. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop pretending there's still a flame. That was when I realized freedom didn't mean abandoning her. It didn't mean erasing the years we had shared or the family we had built. It meant stepping into a future where we could both stop pretending, where maybe she could find healing without the burden of carrying my unspoken resentment, and where I could find the version of myself that I had almost forgotten existed. And for the first time in a long time, the thought of tomorrow didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a chance. The last morning of our marriage didn't look like an ending. There were no slammed doors, no shouting, no broken glass, only stillness, the kind that makes you wonder if the world itself is holding its breath. Sunlight streaked across the bedroom as I woke early, listening to her uneven breathing beside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt not anger, but gratitude. Gratitude for the laughter we once shared, the storms we endured, and even the struggles that shaped me into who I am now. When she stirred awake, her eyes lingered on mine. "You're not really here anymore, are you?" she whispered. The words landed heavy, a truth we had both avoided. I held her hand and said quietly, "I think I left a long time ago." She didn't cry. She only nodded, as though she had known it all along. Later, at the kitchen table, scratched, stained, carrying years of our life, I spoke the words I had rehearsed but dreaded. "I'll always love you, but I can't keep living like this. It's not fair to either of us." She twisted her wedding band, then surprised me with honesty. "You've carried more than I admitted, and I hated you for not saving me from myself. That wasn't fair." Her words cracked something inside me. For years, I had cast myself as the burdened husband, the unloved partner. But marriages don't unravel because of just one person. They wither piece by piece, both people contributing in ways they don't always see. That afternoon, we talked longer than we had in years, not to fix what was broken, but to finally tell the truth. By evening, we were exhausted, yet lighter. That night, I pulled out the letter I had written weeks before, the one filled with confessions and guilt. I added another page, not a confession, but a farewell. A farewell to her, yes, but also to the man I had become, the silent caretaker, the husband who lived in shadows. I promised myself I would rebuild piece by piece, even if it meant facing loneliness head-on. The next morning, I packed a small bag. At the doorway, she stood with glassy eyes and whispered, "I hope you find peace." I hope we both do. When the door closed behind me, I carried only a duffel bag, but it felt like dragging years of weight. And yet, as the cool morning air hit my face, I felt something sharp and clean, freedom, like lungs filling fully for the first time in years. In the weeks that followed, I discovered freedom isn't loud or glamorous. It looks like cooking for one without guilt, like walking at sunset without rushing home to mend another crack. It looks like grief to waking at night to reach for someone who isn't there, then learning to sit with the ache. Freedom, I realized, is both joy and pain braided together. But slowly, the joy grows stronger. Now, when people ask what happened, I don't share the messy details. I simply say, we loved each other, but sometimes love isn't enough. And that's okay, because sometimes the bravest act of love is letting go. Peace doesn't always arrive as reconciliation or a happy ending. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the first light through the blinds, soft, steady, reminding you that the world is still here. And so are you. And for me, that is enough.